What are some cryptid ghost unexplained stories you'd be willing to share? Story 1. One afternoon I was at work. I walked past a room with a window in the door and automatically glanced in the window. There was a woman standing in the room, except there are only 3 people in the building, and the other 2 were in the office behind me. I took a couple steps, realized what I had just seen, and backed up quickly, but by the time I got back to the window, the room was empty. There was only one door, and when I opened it, the room was empty. At the same building, a co-worker was telling me that she was in the office right around the corner from that same room. She couldn't see the doctor, but she could see the shadow of the door on the floor as it slowly opened and closed. She was the only one in the building at the time, and she refused to check. I arrived about an hour later, and she asked me to check the door, and it was still locked. I worked there about 3 years, and every single one of us had stories. We heard voices in empty rooms. Once we were sitting in the office and we heard somebody breathing in an empty corner. It was common to be in one of the rooms and think somebody had just walked into the room, only to look up and find that the room was empty except for you. I had one manager who scoffed at all of our stories. She did not believe us when we told her there was something fairly benign but creepy in the building. We were sitting in the office, she scoffed, and loudly said, "If there's anything in here, prove it." We all held our breath, kind of nervous, a bit scared, but also curious. And just about the time my manager was getting that look on her face that said, "I told you so," something was thrown out in the hallway. It took us several minutes to work up the courage before going to check and finding that a book that normally sat on a bookshelf near the front door had somehow gone from that bookshelf around the corner and halfway down the hallway. The manager never talked about it and quit shortly after that. I've since quit also, but last I heard they were still hearing voices and seeing shadows in the building. Answer: a shame you don't still work there. If you have any friends that do, I'd love to see what might happen if someone brought in a high-quality recorder and let it go. In a lot of cases with office buildings, air conditioners, heaters, and even server racks produce infrasound, low frequencies on the very edge of human hearing that are known to provoke a fight or flight response, feelings of unease, and even hallucinations in some people with enough exposure. I mix a constant 20 Hz tone into the audio track for the haunted house I set up around Halloween to add some extra unease. It seems to work pretty well. Story 2. When I was 7 years old, my grandma was in the hospital dying. At the time, my family was strapped for cash and my mom was pregnant, so only my dad went to California, where she lived, to see her before she died. The day that she died, we got a phone call from her with her wanting to talk to each of us, saying how much she loved us. A few hours later, we got a call from family members saying that she had passed away. When we told them that we had just received a call from her a few hours prior, everybody was in disbelief, saying that she had been laying unconscious in the hospital bed all day and she could have never called, yet alone been able to articulate her thoughts to us. To this day, we have no idea how she called us, and I don't think we ever will. Answer: this story is similar to a Tamil movie Yavaram Nalam. It's a great thriller. A man buys a house where a mysterious passing has happened, which he doesn't know at the time. One day he realizes that a TV series of a channel runs only on his house's TV. Their family have been watching the series for a week, and later, the man gets shocked on knowing the series runs only on his house's TV, and the scenes in the series indicate what's going to happen next to his family. One day, a dead person calls on his phone. Story 3. Do UFO stories count? Fayette County, TN. I can't remember exactly when, but it was after Cobain died and before I changed schools, so either spring of '94 or during the 94 and 95 school year. A yellow-orange football-shaped UFO was over a field across the road from my house. I watched it from my bedroom window while on the phone with a buddy. He used his mom's line, pre-cell phone days LOL, to call the local little airport, but they said there were no helicopters or anything weird on radar. After a while, it headed east towards Somerville, and I couldn't see it anymore. The next day at school, a bunch of other kids had either seen it or their uncle did, or whoever. Seriously, I would love it if anyone from that area remembers this. Story 4. Unexplained story here. So I was walking home from college one afternoon. It's about a 2-mile walk between home and college. I'm on the outskirts of the town center and entering a busy neighborhood, and everything seems normal until I start getting a creepy feeling, like I was being watched or something. So I look around, and what do I find? Literally every person looking at me and watching me as I go past them. Even the people driving were looking at me as they went past. Like, there was this one guy who was turning the corner to come onto the road I was about to cross, and he was legit leaning over in his seat, staring at me as he drive around this corner. Happened for the entire way home, but hasn't happened since. Was super freaked out. Didn't tell my family or friends because they would think I'm crazy. And y'all out there saying this world ain't a simulation. Story 5. I shared this on Reddit a couple of times. I'll make it short this time. 6 or so years ago, weird shoots started happening in my mother's apartment. I lived there alone. She lived with her BF but kept the apartment anyway. The door to my bedroom would open or close on its own. At some point in the night, it would close or open at random intervals, with the door handle moving and all that, and not like slowly. Sometimes it would full-on slam shut or open. I tried everything, closing all the windows to see if maybe it was the wind. Nope. Seeing if there was anyone else in the room? Never. Found anybody, plus the room on the other side was empty except for a wardrobe. Hell, it even happened more than a few times in front of a friend. The friend in question also told me my lamp started to switch on and off when I was sleeping. Not like in the movies where the lamp malfunctions. She said it was like it was turning on, then off, then on, etc. Toward the end of this, the sofa that was right beside the door moved by itself while I was on it, in the middle of the night, while I was on Skype on camera. The door kept opening and closing a few times a night for a few days, then it stopped. Also, I kept having sleep paralysis with visual and auditory hallucination at the time, LOL. I honestly could have thought I was simply going crazy, but I had eyewitnesses. Never understood what happened this week. Never happened again. Story 6. It's quite short. I chose a stall next to a stall that was used by someone with brown leather shoes. I had no toilet paper, so after some time I asked the guy next to me if he can send me a few. He moved his foot and handed it. His hand looked weirdly pale blue and was cold to the touch. I took the tissues and finished up and left the stall quickly. I was shocked to see that the stall next to me was empty. All that was there was a pair of brown leather shoes. I swear I have no explanation. I still think it was just a prank or something, but I just don't know how. Answer: I've had something similar happen. I made a stop at a Wendy's and saw someone's feet in the other stall. There were only 2 stalls, so I jumped in the other one. The person in the other stall said something. I wasn't paying attention. I assumed she was asking for paper, so I said, "I got you," unrolled some, and handed it under the stall, except nobody grabbed it. I said, "Here you go," and leaned over a bit more. Still nothing. I leaned further, looked under the stall, nobody there. I finished up and GTFO. Story 7. I grew up in an old house and my family definitely experienced events that were hard to explain. Besides all the usual noises and occasionally hearing your name being spoken, here's the top 2 weirdest things. 1. My brother and I were teens, eating dinner in the kitchen. There was a glass of water on the counter. We heard a noise where the glass was and both looked toward it, and we swore we saw it move an inch. As we were still looking and discussing it, the glass flew several feet across the counter and smashed onto the floor. 2. Once when I was in college and I was home for holidays, I was in the kitchen getting food prepared. I was home alone at that point, and my brother was due home at any moment. I heard the front door open and close. I called out hello to my brother and heard nothing back. Then I saw a shadow pass by the kitchen into the hallway, and I assumed my brother was being rude, so I followed and kept calling hello. I saw the shadow again turning another corner toward my brother's bedroom. I saw my brother's door closing. At this point, I was calling out about what a jerk he was because we hadn't seen each other in months. I pushed the bedroom door open and uttered some insults. Haha. And the room, as well as the whole house, was empty. That was super chilling. I really had seen someone moving through the house. Flash forward 15 years later, and when my husband and I bought an oldish house, built in 1870, I was up in the 3rd floor arranging boxes, and I heard a very clear and very polite woman's voice say, "Well, hello there." Never saw or heard anything in this house since. Story 8. At my old middle school, I would have volleyball practice twice a week in the evenings. My sisters, 2 years older and 5 years older, did the same thing at my age. I remember going to return the volleyballs upstairs for my coach one night into her classroom, which was 2 stories above the gym. I made it up the stairs and saw the door for the class across the hallway start to slowly open, and a really bright light and smoke or something slowly drifting out, almost dancing. I booked it downstairs and waited a little bit until my coach could walk up with me. The door was shut like nothing happened. About 8 or so years later, I was talking with my sister, 2 years older than me, about what I saw, and I was half expecting her to think I was being crazy. I go into detail, telling her what it looked like, which classroom and door and everything. She wasn't responding to me, so I looked over at her for the first time in a couple minutes, and she was crying. She told me she saw the exact same thing too, and couldn't go back upstairs alone ever again. She was relieved to finally find out that she wasn't making it up in her head or being crazy. We thought of all the possibilities of what it could be. Custodians cleaning with the lights on and maybe smoking. But nope, it was too bright for any normal lights in there and way too dark outside for it to be shining through any window. Plus, the custodians would always clean after school and before our practices. School was done by 2:30, and practice was always 6:30, 8:30. We've heard many other stories from other kids at the school who had after-school activities and would see hear weird shoot. Still creeps us both out to this day. Story 9. My grandpa lived in an extremely rural, undeveloped area in the 40s, 50s when this occurred. Every time he would walk to school in the early morning, it would be pitch black, especially in the winter. There was this huge, old, unoccupied house that he'd walk by each morning, and each morning he'd see the entire house light up as if there were automatic lights or someone inside flipping all the light switches. The thing was, it was an ancient house in which no one lived, but more important, IMO, electric lights in every room weren't a widespread thing where he lived, even in houses with living occupants. Another one. My dad, his 2 brothers, and his parents, his father was the grandpa who walked by the haunted house, had their share of poverty at certain points in my dad's childhood. To the point where my grandpa ate shortening and cucumber sandwiches to save money, to the point where the family went fishing in the nearby lake so they could have dinner, which takes us into our next story. They were fishing for a good while with no bites. Suddenly, this random man appeared with a tiny fishing box, set up right next to them, and started to fish. My grandpa would always emphasize how small the fishing box was because he'd say the man took out a bucket, bait, tackle, etc. from it like he was Mary Poppins. He very quickly pulled in a lot of fish. Then, according to my grandpa, he pulled out a big knife and a board, cut and cleaned the fish, pulled out a big box, put the cleaned fish inside, gave the box to my grandpa, and just left. They never saw him again. My grandparents and my dad think it was Jesus. I don't know what my uncles think. I've never talked to them about it. Not sure of the veracity of these stories, but at least with the second one, there were 3 people who very earnestly told me the same story. Story 10. I got home from school one day. I decided to play a game on my computer. During intermission in the game, I would talk in a group chat with a couple of my friends. We were telling jokes and making each other laugh until I needed to use the restroom. I told them I would be right back and left my phone on the desk and didn't turn it off. When I returned, I noticed that some of the letters were being pressed, even though no one was in the room with me. It wasn't a word that was typed, but random letters with the symbols spacing them out. To me, it didn't mean anything, so I asked my friends if they thought it meant something, but they were startled by it and didn't know what it meant either. I thought it was strange, but decided to ignore it. Later that night, when I decided to go to bed, I turned off my lamp and got under the sheets. My cat, Portia, was by me sound asleep. A few moments later, I heard what sounded like footsteps slowly creepy through the hallway to my bedroom. Suddenly, they stopped right outside my doorway. I glanced up and expected to see my brother, but no one was in sight. From her dead sleep, Portia bolted up, stood at the end of my bed, and stared into the hallway. I was confused since she had never done that before. I tried to get her back to her normal spot on my bed, but she wouldn't budge. I even put my hand in front of her face, but she kept trying to peer over it. She eventually sat back down and went to bed. Since then, I haven't had any other experiences like that, and I still wonder if there was something trying to contact me that night. Story 11. About a decade ago, I was visiting a graveyard to pay my respects. This was back in my family's home country. I was feeling absolutely fine throughout the day, but come time to leave the graveyard, I suddenly felt like I couldn't walk by myself. My shoulders were extremely heavy, my body was drained, and my legs felt like they were being anchored down by weights. More specifically, hands. It was as if I had multiple hands grabbing me by the ankles, so I couldn't keep walking. I actually felt quite panicked, so I told the family member I was with that I'm literally feeling like my life. Forces, for lack of better translation, are being sucked out of me, to which they nonchalantly replied, "Well, they probably want your young, lively spirit." In the end, I had to be carried out of the premises. Story 12. One day, I was with my brother, and we both walked out our house and started walking down the street at about 11:12 p.m. All of a sudden, about 5 meters away from us, a woman in a white dress just straight up walked into the wall and disappeared. I had no clue to where she came from, and I didn't recognize who she was. I couldn't see her face as we saw her from her side profile, but she had dark, long black hair. I was frozen still for about 2-3 seconds, and then turned to my brother to ask him. He just saw that. I looked over at him, and he was also frozen and replied with a yeah. We both just walked immediately back into our house and decided not to go out that night. Apparently, a few other people on my street have seen something similar, but for me, it was only that one time. Story 13. My dad told me this one. One day, when my dad was at home alone, he was going to eat one more thing before showering. He got some ulam, food in Filipino, because my dad is Filipino, and began eating. Then there was a blackout, so he got a candle and continued eating. He saw something white to his right. He looked to his right and saw nothing. He continued eating, but it was still there. He got a bit nervous and began eating faster. It was still there. He ate even faster. When my dad finished, he He quickly put the bowl in the sink and looked in the mirror. He then noticed there was a piece of rice stuck next to his eye. Story 14. There was a really weird occurrence at my dad's house a few years ago. He awoke to the sound of dogs barking and realized the neighborhood dogs were barking at something that was moving parallel to the road. When his own started to bark, he went outside to see what was up. Across the street is pretty much all forest except a church directly across the street that at the time was just a gravel lot. My dad was too far away to see anything, but in the dead of night, he could definitely hear the sound of someone running at full tilt across the gravel. A few things freaked him out from this. 1. Whatever it was definitely ran on 2 feet. Try having a dog run on gravel versus a human, and you can tell the difference. And it was big. Both myself and he have witnessed large animals like bears and moose running through the underbrush, and according to him, it sounded like it was of a similar size to those creatures. 2. It was easily running somewhere around 40-50 meters in the clearing of the lot, then slowed down again as it went back into the woods. He was able to compare the speed because the road itself is 45 mph limit, so it was going just as fast as a passing car. 3. The final thing. Its huffing and gasping was so loud he could hear it from his front door and was obviously not human. We looked online later to compare its sound to other animals, and it really didn't sound like anything he'd ever heard before. The freakiest part was the almost synchronous reactions the dogs had. He's never heard dogs react like that before. Both him, my stepmom, my stepbrother, and several of our neighbors all can account for hearing the strange barking from the dogs, but it was only my dad who heard what they were after. Nothing happened like that since, and I've never personally witnessed anything like it. We do like right on the border of the Cascade Mountain Range and are surrounded by park and federal land if you want to get an idea of where this took place. Story 15. It was a rainy winter morning. My father and I were pulling out of the driveway headed to school. We both saw a glimpse of a girl in a white dress, barefoot, blonde, maybe 5 years old, run around the corner of our home and out of sight. We both looked at each other and acknowledged that we witnessed the same thing. He got out of the car and ran around the house to look for her. When he came back, he said he couldn't find anyone but called my mom to let her know that a little kid might be running around the yard. We thought it was weird, but not much was said of it. And there weren't any missing kids in the area. A few months later, we were remodeling our basement and found a photo album hidden behind the drywall. It was full of photos of a little girl with blonde hair in a white dress. The photo album was from 1922. The family that originally lived in the house died of TB. Story 16. I want to clarify something before I start. I was very young at the time and only have vague recollections of this house, but everyone in my wider family remembers it. So I'll give the few examples I remember and then family stories. My cousins had a holiday house somewhere in the north of the country that we all ubiquitously called the Bog, after the peat fields that surrounded the house. I'll list all known hauntings that were experienced there and by who. My family. 1. Lights turning off and on by themselves in different rooms. 2. Strange footsteps along the corridor. 3. My brothers. Nightlight that was powered by a battery would randomly turn itself off and on even when we changed the batteries, and it worked perfectly fine at our house. 4. Teddies thrown around the playroom or hidden somewhere different to where I put them down. 5. My mom experienced a situation at night where she heard the door open and little footsteps on the floor, so she opened the bed sheets as she thought it was me coming in for a snuggle, and nothing was there. My grandmother. 1. When she entered the house for the first time, she put her suitcase by the front door and went to grab her handbag. She walked in the house to find her suitcase missing. When she walked upstairs to the room, She usually stays in. Her suitcase was on her bed. She was annoyed, so loudly said, "Now, I don't want any of this behavior, you understand?" And never experienced any other paranormal situations. Cousins. A. 1. Lights would randomly shut in the room you were in, but not in any other room. 2. Foul smells would erupt randomly. 3. Items would go missing and turn up in places you would have never put them. Grandfather 1 went for a walk in the countryside one morning with his partner and came back to the house to find all the beds in 2 bedrooms flipped on their backs, frames facing the ceiling. Obviously, they went to check the house for animal entry and came back blank. There was no sign of any kind of forced entry within the house. He left later that day and swore he would never step foot in that darn house. However, the weirdest possible thing about this house? The cousins who owned it never saw anything and said nothing happened to them. They're also extremely wealthy and had the house completely gutted and remodeled before they even used it as a holiday home, so it had new electricity and plumbing. To this day, it's the only paranormal experience my family and I have ever had, and while I'm very skeptic about most paranormal activity, this is just unexplainable to us. Story 17. A couple of years ago, my wife and I chartered a boat out of Key West to do some snorkeling and sandbarring, whatever. So we were 6 miles west of Key West in about 3 feet of water shelling and picking up sand dollars. It's just me and my wife in the water and the boat captain for miles as far as we can see. Maybe 50 yards off to one side of us, I notice a hard shadow moving slowly through the water. I watch it for maybe 30 to 45 seconds, and it stops moving. I keep looking, and a head pops up and is looking at me. It's far enough away that I can't make out details, but it's a blue and orange humanoid head. We stare at each other for what feels like a minute, but is probably 5 to 10 seconds. The head drops back underwater and the shadow takes off underwater at unimaginable speed. Neither my wife or the captain saw it. Or if they did, they didn't mention it. I didn't say anything to them about it. I never felt threatened. My distinct memory when face to face with whatever it was is actually thinking nobody is ever going to believe this. Story 18. I slept over at my grandparents' house one night, and when I woke up in the morning and looked out the door, I saw a woman with long red hair wearing a white nightgown walking by. Oh, it must be my grandma, I thought. I wasn't wearing my glasses, and so I shut my eyes and pretended I was still asleep. Then it hit me with a jolt that my grandma had been wearing a pair of red flannel pajama pants and a red long-sleeve shirt. Her hair is red, but it's short. I remember watching through my eyelashes as the figure looked at me and then turned, continuing down the hallway. I jumped out of bed and ran, all the way to my grandma, who was still wearing the same red flannels. There was no one else in the house but my grandpa, who was still fast asleep. Pretty spooky. Story 19. When I was a baby, I had a bunch of stuffed animals in a net on a wall corner in my room, visible from my crib. One night, after I had been put to bed, my mom and grandma heard me giggling on the baby monitor while they had been sitting together in the kitchen. They went up to check, as that was odd. I should have been asleep by then. They entered my room, found all of my stuffed animals neatly lined up in front of my crib with the net still intact. My mom, grandma, and I were the only ones home. Story 20. One night I was watching The Conjuring at home with my little sister when we heard someone putting a key into our front door and opening it. We were sitting in the living room next to a sliding door that was very close to the front door, so we both heard it very clearly. Now this didn't alarm us since we knew our dad had recently gone out to get some stuff, so we just assumed he had returned. "Dad, you're back already?" I casually asked. There was no response. "Dad?" I asked again, thinking that he had not heard me the first time. Again, silence. At this point, I get the feeling that something is quite right, and I could tell by the look on my sister's face that she was quite nervous as well. Ill note that up to this point she had spent the evening rolling her eyes at horror movie cliches, and she very rarely gets scared. We looked at each other for a moment, wondering what we should do, before we started hearing a few more scattering sounds from right outside the sliding door. I was frozen in fear by this stage. I tried one more time in a louder but shakier voice. "Dad, is that you? Please respond, repeated in my head. But the silence continued. Now at this point, I'm freaking out, and I literally jumped off the couch. My sister also abruptly gets up and starts rapidly walking towards the other end of the room, which leads to the kitchen area. She later revealed to me that she was planning on grabbing a knife. She had this horrified look on her face that I hadn't seen before. We looked at each other in nervous silence. I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't want to make any further sounds. I finally decided to walk up to the sliding door and began opening it as slowly as possible, peering into the darkness. I know, I literally became the idiot who investigates the unknown, creepy noise without anything to protect myself with. When the door was finally open wide enough, I poked my head out and scanned the corridor, preparing for the worst. To my surprise, there was no one there. But what was more strange was that the front door was still completely shut. We never heard the door close. My sister and I were obviously both extremely relieved, as we were almost certain that there was an intruder in the house. After this, I immediately went to go ask my mom, who was situated in her bedroom at the other end of our house, if it was her or whether she had noticed anything. She told me that she thought my dad had come home as well, as she also heard someone opening the front door. Around half an hour later, which felt like an eternity at the time, as we still quite shaken from the incident, my dad finally arrived home and confirmed that he had not come home earlier. To this day, my sister and I still have no idea what happened that night.